So, I haven't been able to get out to hardly any tabletop, nerd, fantasy, sci-fi conventions due to the normal roadblocks we all gotta deal with. You know, finances, work schedule, stuff like that. Now, I did get to drag my sisters and my daughter to Origins Game Fair back in the summer, and that was awesome. I'd really like to attend Adepticon or Nova Open someday, and maybe even enter a painting contest just for fun. You know, it's good to have dreams, right? But a month or so ago, I got to take a genuine vacation. 10 whole days of actual carefree travel and time off, and I went to visit my daughter in Minnesota for the first time. And this turned out to be one of the best trips I've ever taken, mostly because of how much time I got to spend with my kiddo. But it also turned out to be like a convention shopping experience for yours truly. And when I got home with 15 pounds of loot, I thought I'd do one of those hobby haul / Travelogue video things and share all the fun stuff with you. Greetings, good humans, and welcome to Tabletop Alchemy, where sometimes we do a mashup of tabletop travelogue, shopping spree, and anecdotes. And we thank our patrons for partially supporting such a cool vacation. You, my friends, deserve some kind of reward. Side note, before we get started, I had no idea I was going to make this video, so I did not take hardly any photos of anything remotely related to what we're talking about today. So, I happened to hit Minnesota during one of its apparently rare set of great weather days. Out of the week and a half I was there, it only rained twice. I didn't even have to wear a jacket most of the time. The trees were just starting to turn colors, and it was pretty green, and every neighborhood looked like what I call a movie set neighborhood. Because out here in California, which is mostly a desert trying desperately to masquerade as something else, we just don't have this kind of natural aesthetic. But no place is perfect, right? And yes, I know I need to go back to experience Minnesota when it's retreated beyond the wall and fight White Walkers and wildlings. But one thing I found pretty off-putting are the Minnesota freeway ramps. These things are a travesty of industrial design. In most other states I've been to, when you get on the freeway, you cruise on the on-ramp, you merge with traffic, and you go on your way. Minnesotans apparently like to keep their drivers on their toes. Every single ramp is paired with an off-ramp, after which the right-hand lane ends. Every single time. And the resulting merging zones are incredibly short every single time. I guess it's a good thing Minnesotans seem relatively a bit more gracious in their driving etiquette, because out here, those ridiculously short cross-merging enter-exit lanes would just be full of gun battle road rage all day long. Alright, I'm being silly, but it was definitely a thing. Okay, so on to the actual cool stuff. So, the main activities my daughter had planned for us was attending the Minnesota Renaissance Festival, which is apparently the second largest in the country. Now, I like the whole Renfest scene, but I typically don't go to those out here because it's usually 100 degrees and dusty AF. But the Minnesota Renfest runs for like 2 months, and I was super lucky to go on a day after it had rained. So it was super nice walking around. And it's a huge space with permanent buildings. This section here is like 1/20th of the whole park. So, what kind of loot dropped for me at the Renfest? Well, the first thing I got, and don't laugh, one day you're going to be older than dirt too, and then we'll see. But I got this stuff, spicy ice. If I'm walking or standing all day, my lower back just starts to hurt. I've got a pretty rad pair of shoes that help with this, but there's only so much that can be done after 5 or 6 hours on my feet. So my daughter took me to this handmade soap shop where one of her friends worked, and they gave me this stuff to try out. And I thought, okay, holistic icy hot. This will probably smell good and not do much for my actual sore back. Well, I bought 2 of these bottles after trying it out. It smells pretty fantastic, not like a sports medicine or old folks home, and it worked really well. So, you know, I got some soap too, which also smells really good, and I can attest to it working well as well. Whatever. I got some soap and I got some back stuff. Leave me alone. Now, not every vendor at the Renfest has a website, but Seventh Sojourn does. You're welcome. Alright, next we came across a couple of pottery shops. But this guy and his partners had some of the most unique pieces in the park. Now, I know you're like, why am I watching this old guy talk about old people stuff? Pottery? Come on. All I can say is that these Winchester pottery wares hit me on an artistic level. Even though they had like a series of designs, every piece in a series was still super organic and unique, because it's all done by hand, and nothing is like stamped or templated. And of course, there's some kind of resonance going on with my appreciation of that book, A Single Shard. Seeing their stuff just made me kind of want a new mug for daily use. I was having trouble choosing the exact one I wanted, and my daughter pointed this one out, and I knew right away it was the one. The subtle suggestion of the forest and the blue mountain and the colors, It was pretty unique and it just spoke to me a little bit. It has a vibe, like you can kind of get lost in the illusion of depth. It's just trippy. To me. And Winchester Pottery has an Etsy store. You're welcome. Alright, now, we're gonna get to the game and hobby stuff, but, you know, the Renfest isn't really where you're gonna find a lot of that particular stuff, but they do have other unique vendors, right? Like this place, which sells tea. Yes, I bought some decaf chai and some chocolate mint, because I'm civilized and whimsical. Duh. But these dudes also sell all these flavors of olive oil and balsamic vinegar. When I spotted this espresso balsamic, I was like, what the hell's going on here? So I asked for a sample and they gave me one and it was pretty good. Like, real good. Like drinking it straight good. It's a little bit sweet, it's rich, and the coffee is just kind of a solid hint. What? Whimsy, right? And Iron Ladle Kitchen has a .com. You're welcome. Now this would have been spectacular back in my pot smoking days. I'm sorry, cannabis intake days. I always wanted a Gandalf-style churchwarden pipe. They're just cool, right? Come on. So I got this partially for my younger self and partially for what might become a future video. We'll leave it at that for now. The last thing I got at the Renfest I found on the last day, right as we were exiting the park for the final time. Now, I've been vaguely thinking about for the past few months about picking up a tarot deck to use as a storytelling prompt system. There's a ton of card-based writing prompt things out there, and undoubtedly some use tarot decks or whatever. I just thought I'd make my own, like Runehammer's mentioned doing. So, in the interim week between our Renfest visits, I casually mentioned to my daughter that it'd be cool to find a place that sold tarot decks. Like maybe a haunted bookstore or psychic alchemist shop or something. So we did a couple of quick Google map searches while we were checking out Minneapolis and St. Paul, but we didn't really look too hard and I wasn't like fixated on it. But then on our way out of the Renfest that last day, I saw this shop called Merlin's Mind or something like that. And I just poked my head in to see what it was selling. And yep, this shop was full of all kinds of magical and fantasy books. And in the back corner, a whole display of tarot cards. I almost got this deck, Abigail Larson's Darkwood Tarot. I follow her on Instagram and had seen the art for this come up in her feed. But there were lots of other decks, and my daughter was stoked to find this one with art by Giulia Francesca Massaglia. I don't know if I pronounced that right. My apologies if not. She does art in the style of Alphonse Mucha, which I also don't know if I pronounced right. He's one of Art Nouveau's preeminent Art Deco illustrators, and one of my daughter's favorite artists. And I love his stuff as well. So it was a no-brainer. That's the deck I brought home. And there you go. A universe showing paths based on intent and desire. Or, you know, it was just random coincidence. So that wraps up the Renfest haul, but we're just getting started. Gaming and other hobby stuff coming right up. But first, a bit of a weird side trip. My daughter's friend invited us to go kayaking on a small lake that her parents live on the shore of. So we did that, and I have exactly 0 pics of that excursion. But what I do have is a pretty fun idea for a fantasy demigod lore thing that was born whole cloth out of a particular aspect of our kayaking adventure. We're going to go deep on that in a future video about writing and inspiration. So on our way home from the lake, we stopped in a little town called Excelsior that was holding a street fair thing for their apple festival. At least that's what the sign said, but we couldn't find a single apple, let alone a slice of apple pie, which is what I wanted, in the whole place. What we did find, though, was this booth that sold artisanal maple syrups. Now, I like me some 100% pure maple syrup. There is no substitute, and anything with corn syrup is heresy and garbage and should be stricken from the record. Is real maple syrup expensive? Yes, it is. Is it worth it? Yes, it is. Quality over quantity. In most cases. My daughter picked up some vanilla-infused syrup, and I had to get this small batch oak whiskey barrel-aged syrup, which comes in a glass flask. Come on. On another whim, I also grabbed this shaker of hickory maple sugar seasoning. It's subtle and full of umami. Chili powder, garlic, onion, hickory, cayenne. It's good. And wouldn't you know it, Matters Farm to Table has a website. You're welcome. I can't believe I've been talking about maple syrup and balsamic vinegar and soap in a ostensibly what's supposed to be a hobby video. Welcome to Tabletop Alchemy, where it gets weird. Alright, this is probably what you've been waiting for. The 5 of you that made it this far. So my kiddo had a couple of days of normal work. She's an interior designer. So I had a couple of days to roam around on my own during normal business hours. And what do you suppose was the first search term I put into Google Maps? That's right. Tabletop game stores near me. Technically, my daughter and her boyfriend kickstarted my search with links to 2 stores. So I started with those. Now, right up front, I gotta say, Minnesota kicks California's ass as far as game stores go. Like, Mike Tyson clobbering Pee Wee Herman kind of ass kicking. There are way more game stores, and they are all 99% better than most of the Southern California game stores I've been to. So, my first introduction to the Minnesota game store scene was properly stupendous. It's called The Source, and it's half comic book store, half board game store, half war game store, and half TTRPG store. Oh, and half gameplay area with really big tables. I was in this place for at least 5 hours over a couple of visits. The first section I got lost in was the graphic novel stacks, which you kind of see first when you enter. They had a lot of stuff. So I launched my initial scouting operation in as systematic a way as possible. I was determined to go down every aisle and inspect every shelf. I got out of the comic section pretty quick because, frankly, it was just overwhelming. I reached the skirmish game section, and that was fairly well stocked with most of the bigger games. They even had a small infinity display, and that's where I picked up my first bit of loot. The Dragon Lady. It's just a cool mini I've had on several web-based favorite lists, and she's a pretty unique figure for a cyberpunk game. Maybe even Stargrave. Now, when I got to the tabletop RPG section, which is a wall of floor-to-ceiling shelves that runs the length of the entire store, that's where I realized something in a tactile way that I have really not paid attention to. There is a lot of RPG material out there, which I know on a basic level, but seeing stuff online is just different than being confronted with stacks and stacks of physical product. And I really liked how most of this stuff was published by companies other than the big brands. Browsing in a physical bookstore or whatever definitely exposes one, or rather increases the chances of new discoveries. At least for me. I like being able to pick up a new book and flip through it. That's what'll sell me on something a lot more than just a digital photo of a cover and a summary blurb of online text. The Source even had a specific section for indie and local creators. And that's where I found this gem. Into the Weird and Wild. It's basically a setting book for wilderness adventures, ostensibly based on 5e, but written to be system agnostic. It's full of creatures, magic items, locations, wilderness survival rules, factions. It's just cool, and I really like the format and find it very inspiring for how to approach a couple of projects I've got on the back burner. I also picked up Blades in the Dark because the copy I'd ordered months ago never shipped from the online retailer I ordered from. So now I've got that. The Source also had the largest display of Reaper Bones figures and Dark Sword minis I've ever seen in one place. I don't generally paint Reaper figures anymore, even though I've got quite a few metal ones still tucked away in the pile of opportunity. But I want to do a beginner painting tutorial specifically using Reaper Bones figures, and so I just grabbed a few for that proverbial rainy day. There was also a small hobby tool and random things section where I picked up some angled tweezers and a bag of these slim little sanding sticks. I also saw these weird little packets of 3D printed grass and bushes and decided these bog myrtle things might fit the scale of this secret thing I've got collected for a future video. Now, on my way out, I perused the final display cases, and they had some interesting things behind the glass. Notably, some sealed resin kits from Kingdom Death. If they'd had one I'd wanted, I'd for sure have liberated it from its glass shelf. But aside from that, I made one of the coolest discoveries of the whole trip. I noticed a black and white photo of a miniature I knew from YouTube. Miniax the Countess. I didn't see any packages or boxes, so I assumed they were out of stock. But then I noticed some figures on another shelf, and I thought, I recognize that. Wait, I recognize that one. Hey, wait a minute, I recognize that one too. Yeah, I finally noticed the giant plaques. Two of my favorite mini painting YouTubers had their stuff on display right here in the Source game store. Miniac and Ninjon. And let me tell you something. Seeing miniatures in person without the psychological distortion properties of macro photography really makes the skill and talent hit home. Like, seriously. It's a weird thing to realize that the macro close-ups on a 4K display or high-resolution tablet kind of just don't do a miniature justice in a weird way. Magnified brushstrokes really belie the incredible work at scale when seen with the naked eye in person. I must have stared at those minis for 20 minutes. They were just super impressive and just ridiculously cool to see in person. So that was an unexpected treat. I finally forced myself to leave that store and headed to the next stop, Game Center. Yes, spelled with a Z, which happens to be across a parking lot from the Asmodee headquarters. Now, Game Center didn't have nearly as much stuff as the Source, but they did have two things the Source did not. A huge sale going on and a full cafe complete with beer on tap. Come on. I actually only picked up one item here, the original box of Rebel Commandos from Star Wars Legion, which I got for 30% off. I'd always wanted a box of these guys, but not for Legion. I'm not really interested in Star Wars games, but these guys will be perfect for Stargrave. My daughter and I had a sightseeing stop planned for the Mall of America, because, well, you know, the Lego store, duh, which turned out to be the most fully stocked Lego store I've ever been to. And I've been to a lot of Lego stores. It was kind of stunning to see just how many different Lego sets they had available. But that's not the point of this little detour. Whiling away some of those business day hours, I happened to punch Lego into Google Maps, just to see geographically where that Mall of America was, and a second blip popped up on the radar, someplace called Brickmania. Lego curious, and with time to just relax and chill, I told you, best vacation ever, I hit that direction button and followed the blue line to see what Brickmania was all about, which, it turns out, is kind of insane. I realized once I was in the store that I had seen their booths at various Lego conventions, but I was not prepared for their main location. They create and sell premium packaged third-party Lego sets consisting of genuine Lego parts and custom-designed instructions for builds spanning the entire historical era of mechanized warfare. They print their own blank Lego pieces with the same resin process that the Lego company uses, so their stuff is indistinguishable from printed OEM Lego parts. They also print custom-designed minifigures. I mean, look at this stuff. It's nuts. And they have at least 20 display cases like this one, chock full of World War I, World War II, modern military vehicles, tanks, planes, helicopters, etc. It's literally crazy. Now, one thing I will say is that the prices for their kits seem pretty exorbitant, unfortunately. But I've never purchased one of their kits, so I don't really know what you're getting for all those ducats. But at the back of the store, they had a bunch of game tables set up. And I found this. Their very own original skirmish game. They've written a rule set based around tiny Lego tanks. Tanks aren't necessarily something I'm really into, but the idea that it's all about little Lego builds, I couldn't resist. I picked up both rule booklets, the first of which has the core rule set, which fills up exactly 2 pages. Super straightforward and simple. And then there are like 30 pages of build instructions for various micro tanks from a bunch of different countries. The second book offers expanded rules with things like weather and terrain and updated points values for the armies. These little tanks use a lot of standard Lego parts and are probably easy to build out of anyone's existing Lego collections. It's just cool and creative. I mean, it's a game about blowing stuff up, but I guess most of our games are, right? And this is definitely giving me some ideas for future projects. Like, maybe we could come up with some expanded rules of our own that allow for crazier fantasy or sci-fi Lego builds. I might have to crack open that Lego pile of opportunity pretty soon. Alright, so on another day, I looked up more tabletop game stores, and I found this absolute gem of a shop. Tower Games. This place gives the source a run for the ducats, and I'd go so far as to say that these two meccas of hobby madness tied for first place in my book. Tower Games is physically much smaller than the source, but they don't deal in comics, and the way it's set up, run, and stocked makes it very competitive. It's super well organized, it's spick and span clean, and thoroughly packed with all kinds of stuff. It was like being inside a miniature when compared to the bigger stores, and maybe that's why I liked it so much. So, let's see what Tower Games seduced me into buying. I got this Pirate Borg book off of their RPG shelf. It just called to me. I don't have Morkborg, but perusing this book in the aisle, I was just taken by the ship combat rules and all the other pirate-themed stuff in it. It looks very cool and seems easily portable to any other system. And I dig the interior design of this little book, which is weird because one of the reasons I haven't picked up Morkborg is I find the interior visual chaos a little bit off-putting. For me, it's like 80% there, but I can't quite get into it. But Pirate Borg, I don't know, I kind of dig it. Now, this hot pink book was hard to miss, and I had to check it out, thinking it was going to be something I quickly put back on the shelf. But just flipping through it, I quickly grew eager to give it a good read. I like the idea of crazy Victorian or medieval fantasy city/urban crawls, and Into the Cess and Citadel looks like it's going to be a great adventure building and idea resource. Again, there's very little chance I would have ever come across this online. And I must confess, I'm really digging the print and binding quality of these digest-sized hardbacks. They feel really satisfying to hold in the hand, and the little ribbon bookmarks, they're just cool. I almost bought the Old School Essentials book purely out of digging the physical book design. But I reined myself in. You gotta maintain some sense of purpose and intent when shopping, otherwise you end up with too much fruit that goes bad before you can eat it. Across from the RPG shelves were multiple shelves of Green Stuff World products and racks of Gamer's Grass, one of my favorite tuft manufacturers. I grabbed a bunch of these weird colored tufts and some tall brown grass to reinforce the Pile of Opportunity Terrain edition, and I picked up this weird little silicone mold from GSW. It's for making little random sci-fi control panels, and it occurred to me that some of that transparent UV resin might produce some interesting little parts with some interesting possibilities as far as painting and practical lighting might go. So, we'll mess with these in the future too. And hey, 20 resin tombstones? Yes, please. Next, the Games Workshop shelves, where they had a lot of, well, everything, including these 3 sets I'd never seen. Hey, Games Workshop produces way too much stuff for me to keep up with, like, every day. This Aqualith terrain kit looks pretty epic, and also like something I could not replicate without spending a ton of labor on. So, this will be pretty fun to slap down on a table at some point. Now, these 2 sets just caught my eye. Tell me these crazy giant flea riding guys don't smack of something out of Dark Crystal. That's the vibe I got anyway. And these nomads are just cool. I haven't kept up with the Necromunda stuff, so I hadn't seen anything with this sort of design aesthetic coming out of GW recently. But both of these sets kind of fell into this vague game idea I've had on the back burner simmering for a while. But you know, the first rule of idea execution is you don't talk about your ideas, lest you release the magic smoke and run out of fuel. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Keep the ideas in here until you execute them. Don't bleed off that energy. And the last store my daughter took me to defies explanation. It's called the Axeman, or Axeman Surplus. I don't really have the words to describe what this place was, but if you're ever in the area, you should probably check it out, just to experience it. It is a surplus store. It's got piles and piles and piles of the weirdest stuff, from electronics to glass bottles to, I don't even know. I can't describe everything that was in there. But one thing to check out for sure are all the item signs. They are hilarious and worth the trip alone. But I got this weird tray for carrying hobby stuff or whatever, and a tiny cutting mat. And the weird thing is, they had stacks of every size of cutting mat for like 75% less than Amazon prices. No joke. If I could have got them on the plane home, I would have bought at least 4 of the big 36-inch mats. Anyway, the Axeman. Go there. With a pickup truck. So that about wraps it up, dear viewers. A legacy of exploration and consumerism archived on YouTube for posterity. Buying stuff isn't what I'm going to remember that trip for. That's all fleeting dopamine hits. The real trip was all the time I got to spend with my daughter and all the new stuff I got to see and experience. I mean, one thing we did that was super cool was we Googled a list of, what are the top coffee shops in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And we found this article that listed 15 of them, and every day we'd go for coffee and breakfast and just try a new one out. And I found a couple of coffee shops that were super cool. In particular, my favorite was probably Nina's for its location and interior, ambiance, whatever. And just taking a bunch of days to just not think about other life stuff, it's real good to have a break. I think Europeans have a handle on this concept that we Americans just shy away from. So, if you can, take a vacation. That probably sounds like a dick thing to say. I get it. But even if you just give yourself permission to spend a single hour not worrying about the future or bemoaning the past, that could be one of the best hours you ever spend. Because remember, someday we just ain't gonna be here. So enjoy the trip when you can. See ya.